Welcome to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show, episode 5, April 23rd, 2020, and we're ready to go. Revolution Nothing Less, that's what we're about. It's going to take nothing less than an actual revolution to uproot all the forms of oppression that we face. This is a show about all of that, the world that we live in, what gives rise to all the horrors, all the inequalities, what is the nature of this country founded in slavery and the theft of the land of the native people and the genocide of the native people. This is a show about an actual revolution that overturned this system so that we could bring about a far better world. We take the name of this show, Revolution Nothing Less, from the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian, who gave a talk a number of years ago called Revolution Nothing Less. And you can see around town and around the country and pictures in media of people wearing a t-shirt with the title of that film, BA Speaks, Revolution Nothing Less. That's the Revcoms. They're in the revolution clubs, and they also, and all of us here are working in association with the website, Revcom.us. So we are the Revcoms, and we are followers of Bob Avakian, who really is the most important thinker and political leader today. Why? Because he's developed a way out of this madness, and he's envisioned a future society with a very concrete plan and a constitution for a new socialist republic, which you can find on revcom.us or order the print edition, the hard copy, the soft cover copy, actually, from revolutionbooksnyc.org or revolutionbooks.org, which is the Berkeley and the New York bookstores where you can get the works of Bob Avakian. So we're back here in our Los Angeles garage in the 5th episode of our show. I'm here with Luan. Hello, Luan. I'm here with Sunsara Taylor. And, we want to get going with this show. There's a few things that I'm thinking about that maybe we could talk about for a while. And then we have 2 big segments, which I'll announce in a minute. But I do want to begin with something that we've been talking about now actually in some ways for quite a while, but really going back to the election of George W. Bush, but it really came to the fore again with the election of Trump, and that is this poem. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dim tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. And at the end of this poem by W.B. Yeats, he says, "What rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born." I think, once again, in this time of COVID crisis, we've seen the ugly head of this beast rouse itself, actually all through it with the Trump-Pence regime. We have 2 big subjects for today's show. The first segment is, if you want a title, or we do want one, it's Fascism, the Needed Resistance, the Importance of Refused Fascism, and what this reveals, and this being the Trump-Pence fascist regime, what this reveals about the system that gave rise to fascism through the normal channels of the system, and the great need now to prepare for revolution. We'll begin that with Sunsara interviewing Coco on the editorial board and the editor of the Refuse Fascism website. She'll be doing that on Skype from here, from our garage. And then there's going to be an interview with Raymond Latta, but it's a segment that I've been thinking about as a global pandemic and the need for international cooperation that's running smack up against the dog-eat-dog capitalist imperialist system. This system cannot meet the needs of humanity. So we'll be talking with Raymond Latta about that. And through this program, you're going to be hearing about, and we'll be referring to and showing some film clips from Bob Avakian. So, look, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are filled with passionate intensity. It didn't say rational intensity. It said passionate intensity. And
it's an important distinction.
Yeah, I mean, we've really seen this in the last week. I mean, look, there are these, once again, these fascist mobs that, have been coalescing over decades now, but we really saw them come out in Charlottesville 2 years ago, 2 summers ago, saying, Jews, we will replace, you will not replace us. Basically a demonstration in support of the Confederacy, and they came out with Confederate flags around the country this weekend. It went to state houses, in the face of all the scientific evidence of this COVID crisis. The point here is, let's just talk about this point that's just so frustrating in terms of the best lack all conviction and the worst are full of passion and intensity, just to reverse it for a second. But so I don't know how this is, if these are things that are driving you as mad as they're driving me this week.
Well, I do think that one, we do have to look back, like Richmond, Virginia on MLK did happen, it did happen this year, where you did have 22,000 white supremacist, racist, fascists saying we will not comply with the law, threatening the Democratic people in office, and that is something that actually is a reflection of like what actually has been boiling and what Trump has been unleashing. Like these people who are calling for civil war, like these people who have. Like there were pictures of these people who had patches that said Boogaloo Boys, meaning like a boogaloo, meaning like or from what I understand and looking at it, meaning an act to actually incite civil war. So this is what's been on the scene, and now with this crisis, these are some of the same people who've been buying arms, lining up outside of these, gun places where you can buy guns. I don't know what they're called. I don't care. On that level.
Gun shops.
But gun shops, whatever. But this is serious. Yeah. It's really serious that these different so-called protests happen. Like these are not just some people with their grievances about their shops closing. No, that's not what this is. Like it's much deeper than that. This is, these are people who have been a part of this whole, white supremacist reinforcement and mix that's been fomenting, and we cannot forget like what that actually means and the danger that is actually represented by this Trump-Pence fascist regime. It's not just a one-time thing that's just going to happen once. This is a continuous threat if we do not actually stop like what they're trying to bring forward and do not actually stop the kind of world that they're even fighting for. Like this isn't just some grievances of like just workers or whatever. Like some people were saying this online, and it's very irresponsible and dangerous, like saying these are the same people. They were saying that the people who were out there protesting with these MAGA hats and these signs, like that one person literally had a sign that said, profits over people. They were saying that these are just some workers that we should be uniting with who have the same mission as regular people, and no.
Yeah, we were listening to that. We were talking about this. I wanted to go back to where you started about, I think it's really important what you're remarking on in Richmond, Virginia, which did happen
in January.
It seems so long ago.
Yeah.
But it was covered like a gun rights rally, and that was the demand. It was in reaction to gun restrictions, but it was, like you described, 22,000 gun-toting, refusing to comply, saturated with white supremacy, Confederate flags there, MAGA hats, all of this. And I think it's worth going there, and it's related to what we've seen this last weekend, because there's really two things I really want to hammer at, and I'll come back to the thing you're asking about, but that this is fascist. There is a huge amount of denial. Part of the best lacking all conviction is there's a lot of delusion and self-delusion. Like she's saying that, refusal to confront that this is a fascist movement. I'm sorry, you see thousands of protesters in Michigan with "Lock Her Up" and Confederate flags. That is a movement you should take deadly seriously. And then you have Trump saying, oh, liberate Michigan, liberate Minnesota. This is a fascist, white supremacist head of state, of the most powerful, militarized, repressive state that has ever existed in human history, calling on a social base that's been fomented and trained through the churches, the fundamentalist Christian fascist churches, to believe that this is God's mission for them, and facts be damned and science be damned, and science is a ploy from the devil to undermine God's will, which is literally what a lot of these people think. And then they're together with this white supremacist movement that's been built up. It overlaps and it's not all the same, but they're merged, and they're out there in the streets talking about civil war, armed to the teeth, waving Confederate flags. And then we were listening to this. It's absurd, and it's dangerous and delusional. She and I were listening to, again on the Jacobin YouTube channel with Anna Kasparian and Michael Brooks, talking about how, well, they literally said, we can't be like, who was it, Colbert or the other one? We can't be like The Daily Show and just say these people are dumb and don't know facts. We should understand they're frustrated. They don't have jobs. They have economic demands, and yes, 22 million people have filed for unemployment. This is a horror. But this is a fascist movement, and we can't obscure that. And I think we have to confront that. They are out there mobilized, and in response, you have denial, you have conciliation, and you have a lot of people sitting in their homes thinking about themselves and wishing it'll all go away.
Well, at this point, a lot of this is you have to call it for what it is.
Yeah.
A, it's bullshit, and B, it's collaboration. I mean, people know, on any number of issues. This was a racist, white supremacist rally in Richmond. Some of our black comrades who came through as part of
actually.
It was you?
Yeah, I was
Okay, well, different people went through, and they're going, I smell fried chicken. I mean, we just have to say what these people are saying. This is not minor shit. These are people who are prepared to enforce what they see as their future. But then you've got this big middle of America, that knows that this COVID crisis is going to hit Black and Latino people disproportionately, the people in the detention centers, the prisoners. People know this. You have to avoid it to not know it. But you know it, but it's okay because it's not you.
That's right.
And so these are things that we, and then in terms of the question of leadership here, the Democratic Party is not going to do this. We're going to get into this. We're going to show an important clip from Bob Avakian on this question of civil war. Somebody asked him a question about, will there be a civil war between the Republicans and Democrats? And the fact of the matter, be a terrible thing right now because there's only one side that wants that, and will even fight it. And, we'll get into the clip, and then we can talk a little bit about it later on. But I think we have to bring out very sharply, and what we try to bring in this show, and what this episode is going to be about, is that this system has given rise to all these savage inequalities here and around the world, and they're completely wrapped together. There's a single process in the world at this point. It's an interrelated process of how capitalism works to oppress countries around the world, to exploit the people, to exploit the land, the minerals, the harvest, and all this, and that also is related to the tremendous disparity and inequality within this country. So that's our first segment here is going to be on fascism. The second segment is going to be on the way this system works internationally, and that we're approaching a point here where this pandemic is probably going to hit the global south in ways that are going to be just horrific, as it was with Ebola. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Then Raymond Lotta is going to come onto the show and talk about that in more depth. So we have a lot to go on. But this point of the Yeats poem and the widening and widening gyre, which is actually the preferred pronunciation. I've heard the poem both ways, but the widening and widening gyre, the spirals of which the center beginning to fray, but still holding. The problem is the center is at the center of the problem. And that's one of the things we are bringing to people, that there actually is a whole other way the world could be through an actual revolution, And what we're starting to work on with this show and out here in Los Angeles with the Get Organized for an Actual Revolution tour is organizing people to see that it's not just a choice between the two futures of the center of what has been the political establishment on the one hand and these fascists who are now in power but rising to consolidate that power. It's not just a contention between the two of them, but there's a third future that we're trying to bring into being and we're working to bring into being, and that is so needed for humanity all over the globe, which is the future of an actual revolution for a genuine socialist republic here in North America and spreading that around the world so that people can get busy working within a framework where we actually could emancipate all of humanity and overcome all of those savage inequalities. So maybe we should get now to this first segment on what's up with this fascism and your interview on Skype with Coco Das from Refuse Fascism.
Yeah, we're going to do that. What I want to do before we go directly to Coco is it's really important this last weekend, refusefascism.org organized protests. This is a countercurrent to the best lack all conviction. It's actually an embryo of what we need much more of. And I know the Get Organized for an Actual Revolution tour was in the middle of this here in Los Angeles as well. Refusefascism.org organized protests at Trump properties across the country, delivering body bags representing those who will die in detention by COVID, those who are in the prisons, those frontline healthcare workers being killed by this regime, but even more bringing out the fascism as a whole of this regime and raising the demand. The Trump-Pence regime must go now. So we want to bring you some footage of that, and then we'll come back on the other end and we'll bring Coco on and talk to her, Coco Das of refusefascism.org.
There was a nationwide call to deliver body bags to Trump properties across the country today.
We demand the immediate removal of the Trump-Pence fascist regime.
No.
They're fascist thugs out here driving around. And we are not going to cede to them because we have an important message in the name of humanity. We refuse to accept a fascist America.
Protesters took their car caravan to Trump Tower. There, they delivered handmade body bags. The group says the bags symbolize the threat that the Trump presidency poses.
We're in Palos Verdes at Trump National Golf Club. There is blood on this regime's hands. In the name of humanity! In the name of humanity! We refuse to accept! We refuse to accept! A fascist America! Trump, Pence! Oh, no!
No election, fair or fraudulent, can legitimize what has been normalized over the last 3 years.
The world as we have known it is being torn asunder. The anti-science Trump-Pence regime is a danger.
Okay, so we just saw this footage of these really important protests that happened around the country this past weekend, and we're going to talk more about that. But before we dive into the particular protests, I want to bring on, I'm very happy to bring on to the Revolution Nothing Less show, Coco Das, who is a member of the National Editorial Board of refusefascism.org, together with myself and Andy and several others. And she's the editor of the website of Refuse Fascism. Coco Das, welcome to the Revolution Nothing Less show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I don't think we've actually had a segment on this show yet that's talking about refusefascism.org, this movement. Why don't you talk about the mission of Refuse Fascism?
Yeah, so Refuse Fascism is a group of people from many different perspectives and many different walks of life who are united in the recognition that the Trump-Pence regime represents a catastrophic danger to humanity and the planet, and that it is up to us, the millions of people who do not want the fascist future that this regime is trying to hammer into place. It's up to us to step outside of the normal channels and to create a movement from below of sustained mass protest that actually can create the political crisis that drives out the regime. We've had one unifying goal from the beginning, which is the Trump-Pence regime, or the one unifying demand, which is that the Trump-Pence regime must go.
Okay, so then this week you did write this piece, and I love the title, and people should read it. We're going to republish it, I believe, on revcom.us, and it's already up on the refusefascism.org website. A hellish week of fascist insanity, and you're detailing what has happened just in the last week. So maybe you could talk and share a bit of that.
So on Monday, you had these press briefings that have been, a mixture of people trying to give information about COVID-19, and then there's been, plenty of lies, attacks on the media. So, the press briefings have sort of been a stand-in for these rallies that he can't do. And it culminated in this what I think is the most fascist I've seen it, where in Monday's press briefing, you had a video that was basically a propaganda video that eliminates the whole month of February. It just shows it starts with a attack on the media, blaming the media for this crisis, with these very selective clips from Fox News of different media sources downplaying the crisis. Then eliminates the month of February, starts a timeline of the regime's actions from March 2nd, and then has all these Democratic and Republican governors thanking him. So you have this propaganda video, and then you have, it actually started with, I believe, Dr. Fauci having to give this kind of conciliatory remark. And this is in the midst of after this whole campaign started with the hashtag Fire Fauci. It's just really dangerous. And here's a person who's really the main scientific voice who could actually give information about this disease that's being silenced by this fascist movement. And then there was this, now routine attack, verbal attack on a female reporter, where he calls her a disgrace and, things like that. So that started with that. And then I believe the next day was when he froze funding to the World Health Organization. I have to look at my timeline because it's very hard to keep track. So sometimes I just need to write it out. So Tuesday was when he froze funding to the World Health Organization. And then Wednesday, you saw these fascist shock troops gathering in Michigan. They were funded by the Michigan Conservative Coalition. I believe Betsy DeVos's family has some role in this. And you see these people, a critical mass of people who are willing to step outside of the normal channels and in order to be this force on the street that will enforce and fight for this whole fascist program, which is genocidal in nature, very anti-science, anti-truth. And then also on Wednesday, I don't know that this got a lot of press, but Trump threatened to implement a constitutional power that has never been used to suspend both houses of Congress in order to force his nominees into these federal positions that he's been trying to fill, which have not been going through a confirmation process because Congress has been on an extended recess. So all this constant tearing up of norms in order to hammer into place and get away with these things that people say that they can't do. But of course, you find out after a while that they can do it. They do get away with it.
In your piece, I also think you make an important polemic where, after describing a lot of what you shared here, and you write about it, what Trump did in claiming total authority over the states and what he did in threatening the the reporter or insulting the female reporter, all these things that you've described, you say, no, this wasn't a meltdown. No, this wasn't a tantrum. No, this wasn't Trump doing not realizing what he can and cannot do. These are moves of a fascist. And I think that's something that's not, in the very fact that you have to make that polemic, which I think is very needed, is responding to the fact that so many people are refusing to see this for what it is. And they're in denial, they're rationalizing, they're dismissing, they're making light of it. And I think this word fascism, we should talk a little bit more about why that is an accurate term and what that means beyond each particular horror and each particular outrage, but as a program, as a qualitative change. So, I think maybe Andy, go ahead, Coco, and then we'll come back to Andy. Go ahead, Coco.
I think that there are moments when there's like a particular aspect of the fascism that this regime is bringing at a particular time, and then there's the whole program as a whole. And I mean, we've seen a lot of the headlines are can you hear me? Are taking into account the that there's danger in what he's doing, but there's a line in our statement of conscience where, people will not utter what they know in their hearts, which is that this is fascism. So the aspects of fascism that sort of undergird all this is, they're fighting for an openly terroristic form of rule. So, you have these people who are saying we will not comply, holding guns. And, Trump said if he's threatened too much, he has the police, the military, and the bikers for Trump on his side. You sort of see that. You see one group that is the only group that is deserving of any human rights or privileges, while other groups are demonized. It neutralizes the opposition. There are all these, fascism is a thing that can be defined. It has features. It has ways that it advances in stages, followed by moments of people normalizing it. And these are all things you can see in everything that happened this week.
I have one more question. Do you want to?
Yeah, I think that, I think that Coco's making, this is an important point in terms of people needing to recognize what it is that we're actually facing, and including the point you were making that it's a more openly terroristic form of the normal form of rule. You were calling it more terroristic, but actually in the suspension of civil rights, the suspension of democratic rights, and of course in America it's all being done under the rubric of, America first and our freedoms and individual freedom pitted against narrowly defined and really the freedom for a white supremacist state. But I wanted to ask you, and that if people don't understand this, your point is that they're not going to be able to fight this because this fascism came into being in terms of through the normal processes of the elections. But one of the problems is it'd be very difficult to fully dislodge it through the normal workings of the system through elections. Whether or not you could remove Trump, is not at all sure. But then there's an entire movement behind it. I did want to ask you one thing, though. I don't know if this preempts your question or not, but in our statement of conscience, it says, we are increasingly on unsteady ground, and any major crisis, international or domestic, could become the catalyst for this regime to drop the hammer, which it seems to me is something you've been describing in this article, the hammer starting to drop here. And history has shown, it goes on to say, that fascism must be stopped before it becomes too late. Enough. We raise our voices here to say, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. The hour is late. If we do not intervene now, we cannot ask how the German people accepted the horrors of the Nazi regime. What we allow is not just what we condone, it is what we become. I was wondering if you could comment some more on that our demand to refuse to accept a fascist America, but in the name of humanity, and what we allow is not just what we condone, but it is what we become.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I think it's a very important thing to understand that there does come a time when it becomes too late. But in that time that people, you're going through like each shock, right? And by and large, people have accepted these shocks. When Charlottesville happened, that was a big shock. And then people learned to live with the fact that there is an open white supremacist in the White House, right? Then, family separation, there was some outrage and it died down. We've accepted concentration camps that are holding tens of thousands of immigrants, right? Under horrible conditions where like a pandemic like this can sweep through and become a fast genocide. I think it's very important, one, to see that what we have accepted up to this point keeps, I'm speaking for myself here, it keeps laying the groundwork for the next horror. And by the end of that, if that continues, then what have we become? We've become the people in Nazi Germany who accepted a regime that murdered millions of people, right? And it's also, I think, the other aspect of that is that the normal workings of the system did bring a fascist regime into power. That is actually a common feature of fascism. They come in through the normal democratic or electoral channels, and then but they can't be removed that way. I mean, I can't think of an example where a fascist regime has been voted out of power. Not to say there aren't any, but that's not typically how fascist regimes are removed from power. So it does take, this is one of those moments where the times are calling for extraordinary moral courage, where you have to sort of have the vision that you have to step outside of normal channels in order to resolve this crisis. And the clinging to the norms, clinging to these illusions that these normal channels will resolve this is actually degrading our morality and our humanity as a people.
I think we have to join that with coming back to the call right now for people. I think that it's profoundly important. I was very inspired by these protests that happened this weekend. They were way too small. That's not on the people who did them, that's on the people who stayed home. But it was very important bringing the body bags to the Trump properties around the country. And coupled with this demand that the whole regime must go. And I think I would like us to bring this in focus as we round out this conversation. Why this demand and why it must be acted on by the people stepping out of their comfort zone, no longer going along with that moral degradation, but actually saying we refuse to accept a fascist America in the name of humanity.
Just what we've been saying from the beginning is it's very hard to dismantle any single aspect of this. It's I sort of think of the metaphor of the blind mice, the story of the three blind mice and the elephant, like each mouse, feels out a certain part of the elephant, but they can't see that it's an elephant. And the elephant here is fascism. And to the extent that you might win a concession here and there, it's very difficult. I think the last 3 years have shown that. The whole machinery, the whole vision is advanced, and at the end of it is a nightmare for humanity and the planet. This regime is blocking anything good that humanity can achieve in the near future and definitely the distant future. So that is why this whole program needs to be indicted, and the whole regime has to go.
All right. Well, Coco, I'm so happy to be with you virtually here and to have you on the Revolution Nothing Less show. Thanks for making the time. And everybody should go to the refusefascism.org website and read Coco's writings. And you can find a lot of them on the revcom.us website as well. But thanks for that.
Okay, Coco. Keep the struggle up. Let's intensify it. And we will do our part here on the Revolution Nothing Less show, but also in all of our work to bring to people the reality that what this Trump-Pence regime is doing is simply, as Bob Avakian has pointed out, amplifying and fortifying the normal horrific relations of this system. And we're going to be working to begin, even in this situation, and especially in this situation, to prepare people for an actual revolution. But a key part of that is to drive this regime from power through the mass action of millions of people, and there is no other organization like Refuse Fascism, and the work you're doing, the articles you write are a tremendous contribution. So thanks for being on the show, and keep it up.
Thank you so much. Stay safe, everybody.
To do now is we want to show a clip from the film, the speech that Bob Avakian gave in 2018, why we need an actual revolution, how we could really make a revolution. And this clip is called, "It Looks Like There May Be a Coming Civil War Between the Democrats and the Fascists. How should we understand this and act to realign things?" This is a really rich question. We'll come back and have a few things to say about it. So let's go to the clip.
Well, here's the problem with the Civil War. If you listen, some of these right-wing and fascist politicians have been talking about another civil war for some time now. Newt Gingrich, who's a close advisor of Trump, a long-time right-wing, essentially fascist politician, and some of these other like overtly racist politicians and so on are talking about another civil war. But the way this is, if it shapes up as a civil war between Republicans and Democrats, it's going to be a very one-sided civil war. And with the fascists being the only ones who actually want that civil war. Because here's the thing about what's going on within the ruling parties and the ruling class. As can be seen by Trump, or with Trump, and Pence, doing his bit. They want to shatter and break all what have been the norms of how the society is operated in a kind of bourgeois, capitalist, democratic way, which, as I said, is actually the exercise of dictatorship, but in a way that also disguises that dictatorship. They want to shatter all those norms. I mean, you never had a candidate, at least in recent times, like Trump, who ran, rallying his supporters to, around the cry to jail his opponent. Even something like that was unprecedented. So their whole thing of these fascists, they want to shatter all those norms in order to be able to construct ones that are even more overtly, openly oppressive and repressive. And as I said in my talk, basically doing away with the rule of law and making it the rule by fascist diktat openly, more or less. But what is the Democrats' answer to this, and why are the Democrats not calling people into the streets in opposition to this? You'd think, my God, the Democrats they talk every day about how this is destroying our democracy, quote unquote. Every day you can hear some Democratic Party spokesperson say this. But why don't they call the people into the streets? Because their way of dealing with this is saying that while the fascists are trampling on all the norms, in order to oppose them, what we have to do is uphold all the norms that they're destroying. And so therefore, we don't want things to come to a head. We don't want a civil war. We don't want things to fully break out into open warfare between two different sections of the society, including of the ruling class. We want to preserve things the way they've been. It's like somebody comes into your house and they start breaking everything that you've got of value, and you say, I'm going to oppose you with all those things I have of value. But they just broken everything that you have of value. And it's like they came in and they shut off the electricity, and you said, I'm going to defeat you by shining a light on you. See, this is a losing strategy of people who cannot really come to terms with what's happening. Because if this section of the ruling class, what I've called the mainstream section, acknowledges that they're dealing with a fascist force that's going to remake the country in a fascist way, then two things flow from that, or at least two. One, then you do have a responsibility to go all out to stop it, including calling people out on the streets and willing to go to civil war if it comes to that. And the other thing is, I forgot what the other thing is. Wait a minute, what did I just say? You have to call out people into the street, go against it. Oh, you have to, I know what it is. You have to acknowledge that the system itself has produced a fascism through its ordinary legitimate channels. In other words, this fascism didn't come in because there was a military coup that took over suspended elections and so on. It came in the same way Hitler came in, by actually through the regular procedures and institutions and processes of the system. So if you acknowledge that this is fascist and not just, you notice how they use every word but fascist. Conservative, populist, nationalist, white nationalist, everything but white supremacist and fascist. Because again, if you acknowledge that it's fascist, then there are implications to that. So, they don't want to have a civil war. They don't want to go to the mats, as they say in the mafia or whatever. They don't want to do that. They want to defeat this. They do want to defeat it, but in their own way, within the, flowing from their whole role in the system. They want to defeat it by trying to uphold the norms that are being trampled on and destroyed. And that's why they keep thinking, well, this time Trump has gone too far. This time even the Republicans are going to have to be patriotic. I mean, he went to Russia and stood there right beside Putin and said he believed Putin more than our intelligence agencies. Surely that's a bridge too far. Surely the patriotism of the Republicans has been slumbering, is going to be awakened, and they're going to do something. No. All it was required was Trump came out and said, well, I misspoke. I meant to say wouldn't when I said would. Now look, the guy's a dumb motherfucker, okay? But he knows the difference between would and wouldn't, okay? So that was all that was required, and the Republicans said, okay, good. He admitted he made a mistake. Now let's get back to the fascism that we're all about here. And the Democrats Chuck Schumer said, okay, if they try to appoint, you all know Chuck Schumer. Okay. I don't have my glasses, but anyway. If I have my dark glasses, I can put them down here like a professor. Professor Schumer. Maybe I'm getting loose and too personal, maybe. But anyway, what's wrong with him is not the way he wears his glasses. That's a symptom, not the cause. Okay, so Chuck Schumer said about the appointment to the Supreme Court, if ever there was a time to fight, this is the time to fight. Well, where's the fight? What are you doing? Where are the masses of people you're calling out to fight? What is your fight? You going to go have dinner with Trump like you did around the DACA and the immigrants? See, this is why you cannot rely on these people, because they don't want this to come to a head. And they're doing everything they can not to have it come to a head. Meanwhile, the other people are saying, fine, Just keep doing what you're doing. We'll just keep rolling on and roll over you. And we're perfectly happy to have it come to a civil war. Because we want to shatter all this stuff and bring in a different way of dictating here. And this is what we're dealing with here. This is why you know, if there's going to be a civil war between two sections of the people, even in political terms right now, not in military terms right now, it's going to have to be the masses of people on one side who really do care about not having a fascist regime in this country, even with all the differences there are among all those broad people who really do care about that. That's going to have to be the side that's going to have to come out and oppose what these fascists are doing. Not the Democratic Party. If, you know, yes, there may be particular lower-level Democratic Party politicians who may join in this as it goes along, but not the Democratic Party leadership and not the Democratic Party as an institution, which again is a ruling class institution. This is what we have to not only be clear on ourselves, but go out and you want to talk about 2 minutes with people. I'll tell you one thing. As soon as people start talking about these institutions of this system, whether it's a political party like the Democrats or the media or whatever, we got to say them very simply, that's them, not us. Those are their things, not ours. Ours is in opposition to all that. Every time you hear people start talking about, you know, people get drawn into talking about, well, we ought to do this and we ought to do that. I said before, it reminds me of the joke back in the 60s when the Lone Ranger, you know about the Lone Ranger, and his companion Tonto, the Indian, were out somewhere and they were surrounded by gunmen firing at them. And then turned out the gunmen were Indians. And they were firing rifles as well as bows and arrows. And at a certain point, the Lone Ranger turned to Tonto and said, "Look like we're in a heap of trouble here, Tonto." Tonto said, "What do you mean we, white man?" And that is how we have to look at these institutions of the ruling class. That's you, that's not us. We're opposed to you, you're opposed to us. We're going to overthrow you. We're going to overthrow them. Not right now, but we're working toward that. This is something, you know, very clearly and sharply needs to be brought out to people. That's them. Yes, there is an us and a them. There is a ruling class and the people who are ruled over. There are the exploiters and the exploited. There are the oppressors and the oppressed. Yes, there are. And this government, these media, all that stuff is them. And we're down here doing what we need to do to get to the point where we can defeat them and get rid of their whole thing. So anyway, the question about a third alternative. Look, again, this goes back to your point about there's all these contradictions. The question you raised earlier. Things are complicated. They're not simple. So we can understand the role of the Democratic Party, but we're also, it's going to be necessary in mobilizing massive people against this fascism to unite with people who still have a lot of allegiance to the Democratic Party and are going to have 1 foot here and 1 foot there, and we got to struggle with them. The basis of unity is not, if you vote, you can't be part of this. The basis of unity is you got to get into the streets to drive out this regime, and we can argue about why you shouldn't be voting for the Democrats. Again, there's a lot of, everything, you know, all these struggles of any major proportion, let alone a revolution, involve all this kind of complexity, and you can't be narrow-minded and rigid and dogmatic in approaching it. You have to have an understanding of what's the objective, and does something more contribute to that objective or more take things away from it? And then you act on that basis, and if it's more taking away from it, you see if you can struggle to change it so it becomes more of a contribution rather than something that's pulling the other way. But this is what we have to do. It's complex. People who are going to, you know, I'm a lifelong Democrat. I'm going to vote for the Democrat in the midterm elections. Well, okay, but let's get in the streets. Because, you know, there's no evidence that voting for Democrats is anything that can be relied upon to deal with this monumental problem that we're confronted with.
Okay, so that was a question and answer with Bob Avakian following the talk he gave, that why we need an actual revolution and how we can really make revolution. And, you know, I can't comment on that without first appreciating his impression of Chuck Schumer. I don't know what else to say about it except that it's it's so true. It rings so true. So, but I guess what I wanted to...
Can I have dinner? Can I have dinner with you, Trump? Can I
know,
have dinner?
He's like that. He's like that. I mean, BA did it brilliantly. So what I wanted to kind of respond to in that was that I think right now especially there is so much, and we're in a moment when Bernie just dropped out, and all kinds of people who are looking at, there is a fascism in this country brewing, and BA talks about it, and we've been talking about it in this episode. All these people are being told, if you take that seriously, then you got to hold your nose in anybody but Trump. You got to go for Biden. You got to pour your hopes into this. You've got to settle for that. And BA is more deeply than anybody diagnosing and examining this fascism, leading people to confront it, looking at where it comes from and the nature of this system, how it came forward through the actual channels and legitimate channels and institutions of the system, taking it seriously, but also struggling that if you do take that seriously, you've got to go outside those normal channels, and you can't rely on these Democrats who are, no, they're not the same as the fascists, but yes, they are part of them. And I just think this is, it stands in such stark contrast to anything else people are saying and analyzing on this.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think, you know, that they are different. I mean, he does say, look, they don't want Trump in there for various reasons, maybe among them, but they don't want him in there. But they're not going to make the fight, and they're not going to make the fight for the reasons that he said. I think, you know, it'd be important for people, if this struck you, that that question and answer, the way he cut loose in that answer, and also the deep content of it, I really do commend you watch this film, Why We Need an Actual Revolution and How We Could Really Make Revolution. But then if you go to Revcom, there's all these questions and answers that are just full of life and analysis and solution. So I really recommend that you go to those questions and answers. Now, in terms of understanding more about the Trump-Pence regime and why it's a fascist regime and how it took root in this country, in America, you know, we've played an excerpt before on this show, but you should go to the film also on revcom.us, as well as on the website refusefascism.org. The Trump-Pence regime must go. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. A better world is possible. Another film by Bob Avakian that was filmed the year before this one in 2017.